The stagecoach rattled into Centralia, Washington, on a blistering August afternoon in 1882, carrying among its passengers a woman whose face remained hidden behind a long black veil that fell from her bonnet to her collarbone. Helena Lancaster stepped down onto the dusty street with trembling hands, clutching a worn carpetbag that contained everything she owned in this world. She had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis, enduring cramped quarters and suspicious stares, all to reach this remote lumber town where nobody knew her name or her shame. The veil fluttered in the hot breeze, and she pressed it against her face with one gloved hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the past 18 months. The town sprawled before her in a collection of wooden buildings that smelled of fresh cut timber and wood smoke. Men in dusty clothes moved along the boardwalks, their boots creating a rhythmic percussion against the planks. Women in practical calico dresses carried baskets and parasols, stealing glances at the veiled stranger who stood uncertainly beside the stagecoach. Helena felt their curiosity like needles against her skin, but she held her head high. She had come too far to falter now. "Madam, you need help with your bag." The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, looked at her with a mixture of pity and discomfort. "No, thank you. I can manage." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She had practiced speaking through the veil until she could do so without stumbling over the words. She made her way down the main street, following the directions she had memorized from the letter folded in her pocket. Mrs. Margaret Peterson, the widow who ran the boarding house, had agreed to take her in as a lodger and had mentioned the possibility of work at the general store. Helena had been honest in her correspondence, explaining that she wore a veil due to facial scarring from a fire. Mrs. Peterson had written back with surprising kindness, saying that Centralia was a place where people could start fresh, and that hard workers were always welcome regardless of their appearance. The boarding house stood at the end of Cedar Street, a 2-story structure painted white with green shutters. A small garden flourished in front, bright with late summer flowers. Helena knocked on the door, her heart hammering. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance to build a new life. A plump woman in her 50s opened the door, her face breaking into a warm smile. "You must be Miss Lancaster. I received your telegram yesterday. Come in out of this heat." The interior was cool and smelled of beeswax and lavender. Mrs. Peterson led Helena through a tidy parlor to a small room on the ground floor. "I thought you might prefer not to navigate the stairs too often," she said tactfully. "The room is yours for $8 a month, meals included. It's perfect." Helena set down her bag and looked around at the simple furnishings. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, a small wardrobe, and a chair by the window that looked out onto the garden. Tears pricked her eyes at this unexpected kindness. Mrs. Peterson touched her arm gently. "You take your time settling in. Supper is at 6. There are 3 other boarders, all respectable folks, and Miss Lancaster, you're safe here. Whatever troubles brought you west, you can leave them behind." That evening, Helena ate her first meal in her new home. The other boarders were polite but curious. There was Mr. Jameson, a clerk at the lumber mill's office, and the Thornton sisters, spinsters who worked as seamstresses. They asked the usual questions about her journey and her plans, and she answered as best she could, feeling self-conscious about eating with the veil in place. She had developed a method of lifting it slightly to bring food and drink to her mouth, but it was awkward and drew attention no matter how discreet she tried to be. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned you might be looking for work," the elder Miss Thornton said. "Mr. Crawford at the general store needs help with his accounts. His eyesight is not what it used to be. I would be grateful for any employment, Helena replied. Before the fire, she had worked in her father's dry goods store in St. Louis, managing inventory and keeping the books. Those skills, at least, the fire had not taken from her. The next morning, Mrs. Peterson accompanied her to Crawford's General Store, a large establishment that served as the commercial heart of Centralia. Inside, the shelves were stocked with everything from canned goods to farming implements, bolts of fabric to patent medicines. The proprietor, George Crawford, was a lean man in his 60s with spectacles perched on his nose. He studied Helena for a long moment, his gaze resting on her veil. "Mrs. Peterson speaks highly of you," he said finally. "Can you write a clear hand and do sums?" "Yes, sir. I kept books for my father's business for 5 years. Then the position is yours if you want it. 6 days a week, 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening with an hour for dinner. $1 a day." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I won't disappoint you." She started that very day, learning the layout of the store and beginning to sort through the ledgers that had been neglected. Mr. Crawford's eyesight truly was failing, and his record-keeping had become haphazard. Helena lost herself in the familiar work of organizing accounts, matching invoices to payments, and creating a system that would be easy to maintain. The customers who came and went cast curious glances her way, but Mr. Crawford had positioned her desk in a corner where she could work with some privacy. She heard the whispers, though, the speculation about the veiled woman who had come to town. Some said she must be hideously disfigured. Others suggested she was a widow in deep mourning. A few even wondered if she was hiding from the law. Helena tried not to let the rumors wound her. She had expected this. People feared what they could not see, and the veil made her an object of mystery and therefore suspicion. 3 weeks passed in a peaceful routine. Helena worked diligently at the store, took her meals at the boarding house, and spent her evenings reading in her room or tending to Mrs. Peterson's garden. She began to feel something she had not experienced since before the fire, a tentative sense of belonging. Centralia was not home, not yet, but it could be. The work satisfied her, and the few people she interacted with regularly had stopped staring quite so obviously at her veil. Then one afternoon in early September, the bell above the store's door chimed, and a man walked in who changed everything. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of a stormy sky. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy. Worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, scuffed leather boots with spurs, and a hat that had seen better days. But there was something in the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence mixed with wariness, that suggested he was more than just a ranch hand. He moved through the store with the easy grace of someone accustomed to physical labor, selecting items and bringing them to the counter where Mr. Crawford stood. "Afternoon, Declan," Mr. Crawford greeted him. "How's your uncle's spread doing?" "Well enough, considering the dry summer. We lost a few head to heat, but the rest are holding on. I need 50 pounds of oats, some coffee, and whatever vegetables you have that won't spoil on the ride back." Helena kept her head down over her ledger, but she could not help listening. His voice was deep and steady, with a slight drawl that suggested he had not always lived in Washington. There was something compelling about him, though she could not have said exactly what. "I will have the oats brought around from the back," Mr. Crawford said. "Declan, have you met my new assistant? Miss Lancaster, this is Declan Irving. He works his uncle's cattle ranch about 15 miles north of town." Helena looked up, her hands instinctively going to her veil to ensure it was in place. Declan Irving turned toward her, and their eyes met. His gaze was direct but not unkind. Unlike so many others, He did not stare at the veil with morbid curiosity or recoil from it. He simply looked at her as he might look at anyone. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Lancaster," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Mr. Irving." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Good afternoon." "She has been a godsend with these accounts," Mr. Crawford said. "I can actually find what I need now, and I know what people owe me." A slight smile touched Declan's mouth. "That is quite an accomplishment. Mr. Crawford's bookkeeping has been legendary for its creativity." The older man chuckled. "Watch your mouth, boy, or I will charge you full price instead of giving you the family discount." They concluded the transaction with easy familiarity, and Declan gathered his purchases. As he was leaving, he glanced back at Helena. "Welcome to Centralia, Miss Lancaster. I hope you find it to your liking." "Thank you," she managed, and then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a gentle chime. "Good man, that one," Mr. Crawford said, returning to his position behind the counter. "His Uncle Robert took him in after some trouble down in Texas. Been here about 4 years now. Works hard, keeps to himself mostly, but he is honest and reliable. More than you can say for most young men these days." Helena returned to her work, but her concentration had been disrupted. She found herself thinking about Declan Irving at odd moments. The way he had looked at her without judgment, the respectful tone of his voice, the easy way he had moved through the store. It was foolish, she told herself. She had no business thinking about any man that way, not anymore. The fire had taken that possibility from her along with so much else. That night, as she prepared for bed, Helena unwound the veil and removed her bonnet. She forced herself to look in the small mirror above the washstand, something she still did only when necessary. The left side of her face looked back at her, unmarred and recognizable as the woman she had been. But the right side was a mass of puckered scar tissue, angry red and pink even after 18 months. The fire had burned from her temple down to her jaw, destroying the smooth skin and leaving behind this permanent reminder of the night that had shattered her life. She had been trapped in her father's store when a lamp overturned during a robbery gone wrong. Her father had died in that fire, along with the 2 men who had been trying to steal from him. Helena had been pulled from the flames by a neighbor, but not before the right side of her face had been seared beyond recognition. The doctors had done what they could, but there was no medicine that could restore what the fire had consumed. Her engagement to Charles Whitmore had ended within a week of her release from the hospital. He had tried to be kind about it, but she had seen the revulsion in his eyes when he first saw her face. His mother had been less tactful, declaring that it would be improper for Charles to bind himself to a woman so disfigured. Helena's mother, already grief-stricken over the loss of her husband, had withdrawn into herself, unable to cope with her daughter's altered appearance. Within 6 months, her mother had passed away from what the doctor called a broken heart. Alone, and unable to bear the pitying stares and whispered gossip in St. Louis, Helena had sold what remained of her parents' property and used the money to travel west. She had chosen Centralia almost at random from a newspaper advertisement, drawn by the promise of a town that needed workers and did not ask too many questions about the past. She covered the mirror with a cloth, a nightly ritual, and climbed into bed. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of fire and smoke, waking with a gasp just before dawn. The weeks rolled into months, and autumn painted the surrounding forests in shades of gold and crimson. Helena settled more fully into her new life. She had proven herself invaluable to Mr. Crawford, who increasingly left the daily operation of the store in her capable hands while he attended to other business. The townspeople had grown accustomed to her veil, and while she still received curious looks from newcomers, the residents of Centralia had come to accept her as one of their own. Declan Irving came to the store every 2 weeks to purchase supplies for his uncle's ranch. Helena found herself anticipating these visits with a mixture of eagerness and anxiety that she tried to suppress. He was always polite, always treated her with the same respectful courtesy he showed everyone else, but there was something in the way he looked at her, as though he saw beyond the veil to the person underneath. They began to have brief conversations during his visits. He would ask about her week, and she would inquire about the ranch. He told her about the cattle, about the challenges of managing a spread in the sometimes harsh Washington climate, about his Uncle Robert, who had taught him everything he knew about ranching. She learned that he was 26 years old, that he had come to Washington from Texas after an incident he did not elaborate on, and that he hoped someday to have his own land. "There is something about working with your hands, building something that will last," he said one October afternoon as she tallied his purchases. "The cattle are not just livestock to me. They represent a future, a life that means something." "That is a fine dream," Helena said softly. She understood the desire to build something new, to create a future from the ashes of the past. "What about you, Miss Lancaster? What are your dreams?" His gray eyes were serious, genuinely interested. She hesitated, her hand going to her veil in that unconscious gesture of self-protection. "I suppose my dreams are simpler. A place where I can work and be useful, where I can live without being a burden or an object of pity." "You could never be either of those things," he said with such certainty that her breath caught. "Mr. Crawford tells anyone who will listen that you are the best thing that ever happened to his business, and from what I have seen, he is right." Warmth flooded through her at his words, a feeling both wonderful and terrifying. She could not afford to read too much into his kindness. Men like Declan Irving did not fall in love with women who hid behind veils. They married pretty girls with unscarred faces, girls who could stand beside them without embarrassment. November brought the first serious storms, rain that lashed against the store's windows and turned the streets into rivers of mud. On one particularly miserable afternoon, Helena was working on the monthly inventory when the door burst open and Declan stumbled in, soaked to the skin and supporting another man who appeared to be injured. "Mr. Crawford," Declan called out, "I need help." The older man emerged from the back room, took one look at the situation, and immediately began clearing a space. "What happened?" "Found him on the road about 3 miles out. His horse threw him and he hit his head on a rock. He has been drifting in and out of consciousness." Helena rushed forward. "Lay him down here. Mr. Crawford, get some blankets and water. We need to examine his head wound." She had learned basic medical care from her mother, who had often tended to sick neighbors. Now those skills came back to her as she carefully checked the injured man's skull, feeling for fractures. There was a nasty gash above his left ear, but the bone seemed intact. "We need Dr. Hensley," she said, "but first we must stop this bleeding." While Mr. Crawford went to fetch the doctor, Helena worked quickly to clean and bandage the wound. Declan watched her with an expression she could not quite read, something between admiration and surprise. Her hands were steady as she worked, years of practice making the movements automatic despite the veil that sometimes obscured her vision. "You have done this before," Declan observed. "My mother was often called upon to help the sick. She taught me what she knew." Helena secured the bandage and checked the man's pulse. "He should recover, but he will need watching for the next day or so in case there is bleeding inside his skull." Dr. Hensley arrived 20 minutes later, a brisk man in his 40s who examined the patient thoroughly. "Good work," he said to Helena. You may have saved his life by stopping the bleeding so quickly. We will move him to my surgery where I can monitor him properly." After the injured man had been carried out on a stretcher, Helena realized she was shaking. The emergency had driven everything else from her mind, but now the reality of what had happened washed over her. Declan was still there, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. "You were remarkable," he said quietly. "You did not hesitate, did not panic. You just knew what to do. Anyone would have done the same." "No, not anyone. I have seen men freeze in a crisis. You were calm and competent." He paused, then added, "There is a lot more to you than people see, Miss Lancaster." She turned away, unsettled by the intensity of his gaze. "You should get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. Mr. Crawford can find you something dry to wear. I will be fine. But thank you for your concern." He gathered his hat, which he had thrown aside in the rush to help the injured man. "Miss Lancaster, I wonder if I might ask you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "There is a dance next month, a Christmas celebration the town puts on every year. I know this is forward of me, but I would be honored if you would accompany me." The question hung in the air between them. Helena felt as though she could not breathe. A dance. He was asking her to a dance where everyone would see them together, where she would be exposed to the stares and whispers she had worked so hard to avoid. "Mr. Irving, I do not think that would be appropriate," she said, her voice strained. "I do not attend social gatherings. Why not? You have as much right to enjoy yourself as anyone in this town. You know why not?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Look at me. I am not the kind of woman a man takes to a dance." "I am looking at you," he said steadily. "I see a woman who is intelligent, capable, and kind. I see someone who just saved a man's life without a second thought for herself. That is the woman I am asking to accompany me." Tears burned behind her eyes. "You are being cruel, Mr. Irving, even if you do not mean to be. I know what I am. I know what people see when they look at me. I will not subject myself to that kind of humiliation, and I will not let you make yourself a laughingstock by appearing with me." She turned and walked quickly toward the back room, needing to escape before the tears fell. Behind her, she heard Declan say something, but she could not make out the words over the roaring in her ears. For the rest of that day and the next, Helena threw herself into her work, trying to forget the conversation. But Declan's words kept echoing in her mind. No one since the fire had spoken to her the way he did, as though her scars did not matter, as though she were still a whole person worthy of consideration and respect. It was a gift she had not expected, and it hurt precisely because it reminded her of everything she had lost. When Declan came into the store 2 weeks later, she braced herself for awkwardness, but he simply greeted her with his usual courtesy and went about his business. He did not mention the dance or his invitation, for which she was grateful and perversely disappointed in equal measure. They exchanged pleasantries about the weather and the upcoming holidays, both carefully avoiding anything more personal. December arrived with biting cold and occasional snow. Mrs. Peterson decorated the boarding house with evergreen boughs and holly, filling the rooms with the scent of winter. The other boarders spoke excitedly about the Christmas dance, and Helena listened to their chatter with a mixture of longing and resignation. She had loved dancing once, had been good at it. But that was before. On the afternoon of the dance, Mr. Crawford closed the store early. "You should get ready for tonight," he told Helena. "I am sure you will want to look your best." "I am not attending, Mr. Crawford." He looked at her over his spectacles. "Why not? The whole town will be there. It is the social event of the season." "I have no interest in such things." He did not argue, but his expression suggested he understood more than she wanted him to. "Well, the choice is yours, of course. But Miss Lancaster, if I may offer some advice from an old man who has lived long enough to have a few regrets, do not let fear rob you of joy. You have already lost enough." His words stayed with her as she walked back to the boarding house through the twilight. The temperature had dropped sharply, and her breath formed clouds in the frigid air. She could hear music starting up from the direction of the church hall, where the dance was being held. Fiddles and guitars, the sound of laughter and voices raised in greeting in her room. She removed her bonnet and veil and stared at her reflection in the uncovered mirror. The scars looked particularly livid in the lamplight. She touched them gently, feeling the uneven texture, the tightness of the damaged skin. This was her reality. No amount of wishing could change it. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Lancaster." It was Mrs. Peterson. "You have a visitor in the parlor." Helena's heart jumped. She quickly replaced her veil and bonnet before going downstairs. In the parlor, Declan Irving stood by the fireplace, dressed in what were clearly his best clothes: dark trousers, a white shirt, a vest, and a string tie. He held his hat in his hands and looked up as she entered. "Mr. Irving, I was not expecting you. I know. I hope I am not intruding." He looked nervous, which was somehow endearing on a man of his size and evident capability. "I came to ask you one more time if you would accompany me to the dance. I will not take no for an answer this time." "Mr. Irving, I explained my reasons." "I know you did, but I do not accept them." He took a step toward her. "Miss Lancaster, Helena, if I may be so bold, I have thought of little else but you for months now. Every time I come to town, seeing you is the best part of my day. I do not care about your veil or what is beneath it. I care about the woman who treated an injured stranger with such skill and compassion, who transformed Mr. Crawford's chaotic ledgers into a model of organization, who works harder than anyone I know and never complains. That is the woman I want to spend time with. That is the woman I am asking to dance with me." Helena felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. "You do not know what you are saying. You have never seen my face." "Then show me." The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and an invitation. Helena's hands went to her veil, trembling. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to protect herself from the inevitable rejection. But something in Declan's eyes, a warmth and steadiness that she desperately wanted to trust, made her brave. Slowly, her fingers shaking, she lifted the veil and pushed it back over her bonnet. Then she raised her face and looked at him directly for the first time, letting him see the full extent of the damage the fire had wrought. Declan's expression did not change. He did not flinch or recoil. He simply looked at her, his gray eyes moving over her face with careful attention, taking in both the scarred and unscarred halves. Then he stepped closer, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the chilly room. "May I?" he asked, raising his hand. She nodded, unable to speak. His fingertips touched her scarred cheek with infinite gentleness, tracing the ridges and valleys of the damaged skin. His touch was warm and careful, exploratory but not pitying. He cupped her face in his palm, his thumb brushing against the edge of the scar. "You are beautiful," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "You are so beautiful, Helena, and so brave. I am honored that you let me see you." Then he leaned down and pressed his lips to her scarred cheek, a kiss so tender and reverent that it broke something open inside her. The tears she had been holding back for so long finally fell, streaming down both sides of her face. Declan gathered her into his arms, holding her as she wept against his chest, all the grief and pain and loneliness of the past year and a half pouring out of her. "I have you," he murmured into her hair. "I have you, and I am not letting go." When the storm of tears finally subsided, Helena pulled back slightly to look up at him. His shirt was damp from her crying, and she felt embarrassed. "I am sorry. I have made a mess of you. I do not care." He smiled at her, a real smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. "Will you come to the dance with me now?" She thought about walking into that hall with her veil pushed back, letting everyone see what she had been hiding. The idea terrified her. But Declan would be beside her, and suddenly that seemed to make all the difference. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway, beaming. "I thought you might need this," she said, holding out a shawl. "It is cold out there." At the church hall, the dance was in full swing. Music spilled out into the night, and through the windows, Helena could see couples whirling across the floor. Her steps slowed as they approached, old fears rising up. Declan seemed to sense her hesitation. He took her hand and squeezed it gently. "We do not have to stay long if you do not want to," he said. "But I think you will find that people in Centralia are more accepting than you give them credit for." They walked through the door together, and a hush fell over the room as people turned to stare. Helena felt the weight of their gazes and forced herself not to retreat behind her veil, which she had left pushed back. Let them look. Let them see. She was done hiding. Then Mr. Crawford stepped forward, a broad smile on his face. "Miss Lancaster, I am so glad you decided to come." "And Declan, good to see you, boy." His easy acceptance broke the spell. Conversation resumed, and while there were still curious looks, they were not unkind. Several people she knew from the store came over to greet her, complimenting her dress, which was nothing special but the best she owned, and welcoming her to the dance. When the fiddles struck up a waltz, Declan offered her his hand. "May I have this dance?" She had not danced since before the fire, and she was rusty and uncertain. But Declan was a strong lead, guiding her through the steps with patience and skill. They moved together across the floor, and Helena felt something she had not experienced in so long: pure, uncomplicated joy. The music filled her, and Declan's arms were strong and sure around her, and for these few minutes nothing else mattered. They danced several more times, and between dances, Declan introduced her to his Uncle Robert, a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "So you are the woman who has had my nephew mooning around the ranch like a lovesick calf," he said with a wink. "About time he brought you around." "Uncle Robert," Declan protested, but he was grinning. As the evening wore on, Helena found herself relaxing in a way she had not thought possible. People spoke to her normally, included her in conversations, treated her as just another member of the community. The veil, which had been both her protection and her prison, remained pushed back for the entire evening. She felt exposed but also liberated, as though she were stepping back into her own life after a long absence. When Declan walked her back to the boarding house later that night, snow had begun to fall, dusting the streets with white. They paused at the gate, neither quite ready to say goodnight. "Thank you," Helena said, "for everything, for seeing me when I could not see myself." "I should be thanking you. You have brought light into my life, Helena. These past months getting to know you have been the happiest I can remember." He paused, then added, "I meant what I said earlier. I care for you deeply. I would like to court you properly if you will allow it." Her heart soared. "I would like that very much." He kissed her then, a real kiss this time, his lips meeting hers with a sweetness that made her dizzy. When they parted, they were both breathing hard, their breath mingling in the cold air. "I will call on you tomorrow," he promised. "We can go for a walk if the weather permits." "I would like that." She watched him walk away into the snowy night, her fingers touching her lips where he had kissed her. Behind her, the boarding house glowed with warm light. She went inside feeling as though she were floating, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Declan called on her regularly, and they spent as much time together as their respective work obligations would allow. On Sundays, after church services which Helena now attended with her veil only partially lowered, they would go for long walks through the snowy countryside. Declan would tell her about his dreams for the future, and she would share her own hopes and fears. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering the countless small compatibilities that drew them closer together. In February, Declan invited her to visit his uncle's ranch. She made the journey in a wagon driven by Robert Irving himself, who kept up a steady stream of cheerful conversation during the 2-hour drive. The ranch, when they arrived, was a sprawling collection of buildings set against a backdrop of forested hills. Cattle grazed in snow-dusted pastures, and smoke rose from the chimneys of the main house. Declan met them at the door, his face lighting up when he saw Helena. "Welcome," he said. "Let me show you around." He took her through the barn, where horses nickered in their stalls and barn cats prowled for mice. He showed her the cattle in their winter pasture, pointing out the different breeds and explaining his plans for improving the herd. He introduced her to the handful of ranch hands who worked for his uncle, men who treated her with the same easy respect they showed everyone else. But it was when they climbed to the top of a rise overlooking the property that Declan revealed what was truly in his heart. They stood together looking out at the land spread below them, his arm around her shoulders to keep her warm in the biting wind. "My uncle is getting old," he said. "He has no children of his own. He has promised to leave the ranch to me when he passes, but I have been saving money to buy some additional land adjacent to this property. About 300 acres became available last month. If I can raise the capital, I could expand the operation significantly." "That is wonderful, Declan." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Helena, I am not a wealthy man and ranch life is hard, but I am a good worker and I believe I can build something substantial here, something that would support a family." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I am trying to ask if you might consider sharing that life with me, as my wife." The world seemed to stop. Helena looked at this man who had seen her at her worst and her best, who had kissed her scars and called her beautiful, who was offering her not just his love but a future she had thought forever beyond her reach. "Yes," she said, the word coming out choked with emotion. "Yes, Declan, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and she kissed him back with all the love and gratitude and hope that filled her heart. The wind whipped around them, but she felt only warmth, only joy, only the certainty that she had found where she belonged. They were married in April, when the world was turning green again and wildflowers carpeted the meadows. It was a small ceremony in the Centralia church, with Mrs. Peterson and Mr. Crawford standing as witnesses and Robert Irving giving the bride away. Helena wore a simple dress of ivory silk that the Thornton sisters had made for her, and for the first time since the fire, she did not wear a veil at all. She walked down the aisle with her face uncovered, her scarred cheek visible to all, and she felt no shame, only pride and happiness. Declan waited for her at the altar, magnificent in a new suit, his eyes never leaving her face. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Declan kissed her as though she were the most precious thing in the world, and the small congregation burst into applause. The reception was held at the boarding house, where Mrs. Peterson had outdone herself with food and decorations. People from the town came to offer their congratulations, and Helena accepted them all with grace. She danced with her new husband, with Mr. Crawford, feeling more alive than she had in years. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Declan and Helena climbed into a wagon laden with her belongings and began the journey to the ranch that was now her home. The spring evening was mild and sweet-smelling, full of the promise of new beginnings. At the ranch, Robert had tactfully made himself scarce, leaving the newlyweds alone in the house. Declan carried Helena over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down in the main room. A fire crackled in the hearth, and someone, probably Robert, had left flowers in vases throughout the room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irving," Declan said, his voice husky with emotion. "It is a good name," Helena said. "I am proud to wear it." That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that took Helena's breath away. Declan treated her body like something sacred, kissing every scar, every mark the fire had left, until she believed him when he said she was beautiful. She gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, and in his arms she finally felt whole again. Their life together settled into a rhythm of work and contentment. Helena threw herself into ranch life with the same dedication she had brought to her work at the store. She kept the ranch accounts, managed the household, learned to cook for the ranch hands during busy seasons, and even helped with lighter chores like tending the kitchen garden and feeding the chickens. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. She was building something alongside Declan, creating a future with her own hands. Declan's land purchase went through in late May, and they spent the summer expanding the operation. Helena helped where she could, bringing water and food to the men working to repair fences and build new outbuildings. She watched her husband with pride as he demonstrated his knowledge and skill, earning the respect of everyone who worked with him. In August, Helena realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be certain before telling Declan, wanting to be sure before raising his hopes. When she was finally confident, she waited for the right moment to share the news. It came on a Sunday afternoon when they were sitting together on the porch, watching the sun set over the western hills. Declan had his arm around her, and she was leaning against his shoulder, perfectly content. "Declan, I have something to tell you," she said quietly. "What is it?" He looked down at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "I am going to have a baby. Sometime in early spring, the doctor thinks." For a moment he just stared at her as though he could not quite process the words. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "Truly, Helena, truly." "Truly." He let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to stop. When he set her down, there were tears in his eyes. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he said. "A child, our child, I can hardly believe it." "Believe it," she said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "By this time next year there will be 3 of us." The pregnancy progressed without major complications. Helena continued her work around the ranch, though Declan and Robert both fussed over her, trying to prevent her from doing anything too strenuous. She bore their concern with patient amusement, knowing it came from love. Winter arrived again, and with it a peaceful contentment. Helena spent her evenings knitting small garments for the baby, while Declan read aloud to her from newspapers and books. They discussed names, settling finally on Daniel for a boy and Hope for a girl. Robert, who would be a grandfather in spirit if not in blood, had already begun carving toys for his soon-to-arrive grandchild. On a cold March night, Helena's labor began. The midwife was summoned from town, and through the long hours of pain and effort, Declan stayed by her side, holding her hand and offering encouragement. When dawn broke, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Hope," Helena whispered, cradling the tiny, perfect infant against her chest. "Her name is Hope." Declan kissed his wife's forehead, then gently touched his daughter's downy head. "She is perfect. You are both perfect." In the days that followed, As Helena recovered and began to navigate the exhausting, exhilarating world of new motherhood, she would sometimes catch Declan watching her with an expression of such profound love and gratitude that it took her breath away. This man, this good, honest man, had seen past her scars to the person beneath. He had given her not just love but a second chance at life, a future she had thought forever lost. Little Hope thrived, growing from a tiny, wrinkled infant into a chubby, cheerful baby who smiled easily and rarely cried. The ranch prospered as well. The expanded herd produced a good calf crop that year, and Declan was able to hire additional hands to help manage the growing operation. Helena kept the books meticulously, ensuring that every penny was accounted for and invested wisely. When Hope was 6 months old, Mrs. Peterson came to visit for a week, exclaiming over how much the baby had grown and how well Helena looked. "You are positively glowing," the older woman said. "Ranch life agrees with you." "It is not the ranch," Helena said with a smile. "It is the life Declan and I have built together. I never thought I could be this happy." "You deserve every bit of happiness you have found, my dear. You have come so far from that sad, frightened woman who arrived in Centralia 2 years ago." That evening, after Mrs. Peterson had retired to the guest room and Hope was asleep in her cradle, Helena and Declan sat together by the fire. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her cheek. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing me, I mean. There were so many other women you could have courted, women without scars, without a painful past." Declan shifted so he could look into her eyes. His hand came up to cup her scarred cheek, a gesture that had become familiar and beloved over their time together. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Helena, you are the strongest, most resilient person I have ever known. Your scars are not a flaw. They are proof that you survived something terrible and came out the other side still able to love and trust and hope. How could I regret choosing that? How could I regret choosing you?" He kissed her scarred cheek, then her lips, and she melted into his embrace, grateful beyond words for this man and the life they shared. The years passed in a gentle progression of seasons and milestones. Hope grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed her father around the ranch like a shadow, chattering constantly in her baby voice about everything she saw. When she was 2, Helena gave birth to a son they named Daniel, after Declan's father. 2 years after that, another daughter arrived whom they called Grace. Robert Irving passed away peacefully in his sleep when Hope was 5, leaving the ranch entirely to Declan as he had promised. It was a sad time, but also a moment of transition. Declan formally became the owner of the property he had worked for so long, and he and Helena made plans to continue expanding and improving it. The children grew, and Helena found immense joy in motherhood. She taught them their letters and numbers, read to them every night, and made sure they understood the importance of hard work and kindness. All 3 children adored their father, who somehow always found time to play with them despite the demands of running the ranch. And they loved their mother fiercely, never once questioning or commenting on her scars. To them, she was simply Mama, perfect as she was. When Hope was 7, she came home from school one day upset. A new family had moved to the area, and their son had stared at Helena's scars and asked Hope why her mother's face looked strange. Helena found her daughter crying in the barn and her heart ached. "I told him to stop being rude," Hope said through her tears. "But Mama, why did he say that? Why did he stare?" Helena pulled her daughter into her lap, smoothing her dark hair. "Some people have never seen scars like mine before, and they do not know how to react. It is not his fault, really. He is just curious." "But it made me so angry," Hope said. You are the most beautiful mama in the world, and he had no right to make you sound like something is wrong with you." Tears pricked Helena's eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. But you know what? He is right that I look different. My scars are real and they are visible, but they do not define who I am. I got these scars in a fire that also took my father from me. They remind me every day that life is precious and that we should not take the people we love for granted. And if that boy had asked me about them politely, I would have told him that story. Maybe next time you see him, you can tell him it is okay to be curious, but he should ask questions with kindness." Hope considered this, then nodded. "I think I can do that. That is my brave girl." The incident reminded Helena of how far she had come. There was a time when such a comment would have devastated her, sending her back into hiding behind her veil. But now, surrounded by a family who loved her and a community that had accepted her, she could face the occasional thoughtless remark with equanimity. The scars were part of her story, but they were not the whole story. Not anymore. As the children entered their teenage years, the ranch continued to prosper. Declan had built it into one of the most successful operations in the county, known for the quality of its cattle and the integrity of its owner. He served on the town council and was respected throughout the region. Helena managed the business side of the operation with the same skill she had once brought to Mr. Crawford's general store, though the old shopkeeper had long since retired, and the store was now run by his nephew. Hope grew into a lovely young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's steadiness. Daniel was a natural with horses and animals, planning to stay on the ranch and eventually take it over from his father. Grace, the youngest, was artistic and dreamy, filling notebooks with sketches and stories. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Declan surprised Helena with a trip to Seattle, leaving the children in the capable hands of their longtime foreman and his wife. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together since their honeymoon, and they reveled in the brief taste of freedom and novelty. As they walked along the waterfront, watching ships come and go in the harbor, Declan took Helena's hand. "Do you remember the day I first saw you?" he asked. "In Crawford's store, working over those ledgers with such concentration. I remember. I was terrified that you would stare at my veil like so many others had. But I did not." "No, you did not. You treated me like a person, not a curiosity or an object of pity. That was the first gift you ever gave me, though there have been so many since." He stopped walking and turned to face her. The afternoon sun caught the silver that had begun to thread through his dark hair, making him look distinguished. "You gave me gifts as well, Helena. You taught me that real beauty has nothing to do with appearance. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up grateful every morning. You made me a better man than I ever would have been without you." She reached up to touch his face, this beloved face she knew as well as her own. "We made each other better. That is what love does, I think. It transforms us." He kissed her there on the waterfront, not caring who might see, and she kissed him back with all the passion and affection of 20 years together. They were no longer the uncertain young people who had found each other in a small Washington town. They had been tested by time and hardship and had emerged stronger, their bond deeper and more precious for having weathered storms together. When Hope turned 18, she announced her intention to attend the new state normal school to become a teacher. Helena and Declan were proud but also sad to see their eldest leave home. They threw her a party before she departed, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the region. As Helena watched her daughter laugh and dance, so confident and full of potential, she marveled at the strange paths life could take. This beautiful, accomplished young woman existed because a cowboy had once seen past a veil and kissed a scar. Daniel took on increasing responsibility at the ranch, working alongside his father and learning everything Declan could teach him. Grace announced her desire to move to San Francisco to study art, a plan that terrified Helena but that Declan supported wholeheartedly. "We raised them to be strong and independent," he reminded his wife. "We have to trust that they will make good decisions." As their children ventured out into the world, Helena and Declan found themselves entering a new phase of their life together. The ranch still demanded constant work, but with Daniel taking on more and more of the daily management, they had more time for each other. They took long rides through the hills, revisiting spots that held special memories. They read together by the fire in the evenings, discussed current events, and planned for the future. On a warm June evening when Helena was 52 and Declan 54, they received a telegram that Hope had become engaged to a young lawyer in Seattle. They traveled to the city for the wedding, held in a beautiful church overlooking Elliott Bay. As Helena watched her daughter exchange vows with a man who clearly adored her, she felt a profound sense of peace and completion. The cycle was continuing. Love was finding the next generation. At the reception, Hope pulled her mother aside. "Thank you," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. Thank you for teaching me that what matters is not how we look but who we are. You and Papa gave me the best example I could have asked for." Helena embraced her daughter, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. How could she explain that Hope and her siblings had saved her as much as Declan had? That being their mother had given her purpose and joy beyond anything she had imagined. The years continued their steady march. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from the next county, a practical, capable woman named Sarah who fit seamlessly into ranch life. They gave Helena and Declan their first grandchild, a boy named Robert after Declan's uncle. Grace returned from San Francisco with a portfolio of stunning paintings and a commission to illustrate a book of Western folk tales. She had not married, declaring herself too much in love with her work to settle down, and her parents supported her choice. Helena marked her 60th birthday surrounded by family. Her husband, her 3 children, her daughter-in-law, and 2 grandchildren, with another on the way. They held the celebration at the ranch, and as Helena looked around at all these people she loved, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The fire had taken so much from her, but it had also, in a strange way, given her this life. She would never be glad for the scars or the pain they represented, but she could acknowledge that they had led her to Centralia, to Declan, to this full and beautiful life she had built. After the guests had left and the children had settled down for the night, Helena and Declan sat on the porch as they had countless times before. The summer night was warm and full of cricket song. Declan held her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," she said. "The past, the present, the future, how lucky I am." "We are lucky," he corrected. "Both of us. We found each other when we both needed someone to believe in." She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, leather and hay and the soap he used. After all these years, it still felt like home. "I love you," she said. "I do not say it enough, but I do, more than I can express." "I know," he said softly, "and I love you. Every day, every moment, every year we have had together. You are my best friend, my partner, my greatest blessing." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one, 2 people who had found each other against the odds and built something enduring. The scars that had once defined Helena were barely noticeable now, faded by time and overshadowed by the fullness of her life. She rarely thought about them anymore, except when she caught sight of her reflection, and remembered the frightened woman who had once hidden behind a veil. That woman seemed like a stranger now. Helena Lancaster Irving was not defined by what had happened to her but by what she had made of her life afterward. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a rancher, a keeper of accounts, a friend. She was loved and respected. She had built a legacy that would outlast her, and it had all begun with a cowboy who looked past the veil and saw her. When Daniel and Sarah's third child arrived, they named her Helena after her grandmother. The baby had dark hair and gray eyes like her grandfather, and she would grow up hearing stories about the strong, brave woman whose name she carried. The Helena who had survived fire and loss and fear to find love and build a family. The Helena who taught everyone who knew her that scars, whether visible or hidden, do not define us. Our choices define us. Our courage defines us. Our capacity to love and be loved defines us. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered again at the ranch for a celebration. Hope had come from Seattle with her husband and 3 children. Grace had traveled from San Francisco, where she had become a well-known artist. Daniel and Sarah were there with their 4 children, the youngest just a baby. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. At one point in the evening, Helena found herself alone in the kitchen for a moment, catching her breath from all the activity. Declan came in and found her there, and without a word, he took her in his arms and began to dance with her, humming a tune from their wedding. She followed his lead just as she had that first night at the Christmas dance so many years ago, and they swayed together in the quiet kitchen while chaos reigned in the rest of the house. 40 years, he murmured. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. The best 40 years of my life, she said. Thank you for seeing me, Declan, for really seeing me when I could not see myself. Thank you for letting me, he replied. Thank you for being brave enough to trust me with your heart. He kissed her then, a kiss that held 40 years of love and partnership and devotion. When they finally pulled apart, their eyes were wet with happy tears. The party continued long into the night, and as Helena watched her family laugh and talk and love one another, she felt complete satisfaction. This was what mattered. This was what endured. Not the scars or the pain or the fear, but this. Family, love, connection, joy. Years later, when Helena was 82 and Declan 84, they sat together on the porch one last time. Declan's health had been failing, and they both knew that their time together was drawing to a close. But there was no bitterness in their hearts, only gratitude for the long, full life they had shared. No regrets, Helena asked, as she had asked so many times before. Not a single one, Declan said, as he always did. You have been my greatest adventure, Helena Irving, my greatest joy. She held his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and the strength that still remained in his grip. And you have been mine. You saved me, you know. That day you lifted my veil and kissed my scar. You gave me my life back. We saved each other, he said. That is what love does. He passed peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later, surrounded by his family. Helena held his hand until the very end, whispering her love and gratitude. When he was gone, she felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. But she did not collapse under the weight of grief. She had learned, over the course of her long life, that she was stronger than she knew. She lived for another 5 years, watching her grandchildren grow and her great-grandchildren be born. She stayed at the ranch, which Daniel ran with the same integrity and skill his father had shown. She told stories to anyone who would listen about the cowboy who had seen past her scars and the life they had built together. She kept his memory alive not through tears, but through celebration of all they had been to each other. When Helena finally passed away at the age of 87, she was laid to rest beside Declan in the Centralia cemetery, under a headstone that bore both their names and a simple inscription. Together in life and death, bound by love. The family they had created continued to grow and thrive. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the values they had instilled: integrity, hard work, compassion, courage. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they believed in each other. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the western hills, those who knew the story would swear they could see two figures standing on the porch of the old ranch house, holding hands and watching the stars come out. The veiled woman and the cowboy who had loved her. Together still, as they had always been, as they would always be, their love story became part of the fabric of Centralia's history, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. But at its heart, it was a simple truth. That love sees beyond surfaces to the soul beneath, that courage means being vulnerable enough to let yourself be seen, and that the deepest scars can become sources of strength when held in the right hands. Helena and Declan had proven that beauty is not about perfection, but about authenticity, not about appearance, but about character. They had shown that a life marked by hardship could still be filled with joy, and that the greatest adventures often begin with a single act of kindness. The veil that Helena had worn for protection had become unnecessary the moment Declan lifted it and kissed her scar. In that gesture, he had shown her that she was worthy of love exactly as she was. And she had shown him that trust, once given and honored, could transform two solitary people into a partnership that would weather any storm. Their story was one of healing and hope, of second chances and hard-won happiness. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best ones, and that love, real love, sees us completely and chooses us anyway. Helena and Declan had found each other in the wild and beautiful territory of Washington, in a time when the West was still being tamed and anything seemed possible. They had built a legacy not of wealth or fame, but of love and family and dedication to each other. And in the end, that was everything.